Hello and welcome back to Bookish. In honor of Jane Austen July, I thought I would do one of my videos on one of my Where Not to Start videos. This time, Where Not to Start with the works of Jane Austen. This is fraught with all kinds of peril. Jane Austen is a rightly beloved author here on BookTube. Obviously, has a whole month dedicated to her, and a lot of people who read her, studied her work, studied her life, know way more about her than I do. But I'm going to go ahead and give this list of three places which I think are maybe not the best idea about where to start with Jane Austen. As always, these are just my opinion based on my experiences of the reading, and I'm not necessarily saying anything negative about the books in general or in any specific way here. You know, Jane Austen is one of the great writers in the English language. Just intricate plotting, great characters, subtlety, beauty, wit in her writing. You know, I hesitate to ever say, you know, that everybody should read a certain author, but if there is one of those authors, it's Jane Austen, just to read the work of a truly great writer. So I'm not trying to, you know, denigrate necessarily any of these books that Jane Austen wrote. My purpose is to try to, you know, give you some advice about maybe where to start so that you keep reading Jane Austen. That's what this is about. So I've read all 6 of Jane Austen's primary novels. I've also read Lady Susan. I have not read Sanditon, the Wallaces, is that what it is? I don't think that's the name, or any of her juvenilia. So this is just based on the 6 primary works in Lady Susan that I've read. So the first book that I would tell you is a bad place to start with Jane Austen is in fact Lady Susan. Lady Susan has one, I think, virtue probably going for it as a place to start, and that is that it's relatively short, but I think that its negatives in terms of a place to start with Jane Austen outweigh that. It's an epistolatory novel, meaning it's told completely in letters, and Austen is brilliant, and the letters that she has her characters exchange are brilliant, and they provide insight into characters, they develop the plot, and it's really well done up to a point, but then, you know, near the end, the plot just seems to kind of run out of steam, and Austen just kind of summarizes everything, and it has a really unsatisfying ending. Additionally, while oftentimes Austen's novels contain letters, which are really important to understand the plot, this is her only, as far as I know, epistolary novel. Of the 6 primary novels, none of them are, strictly speaking, written in the form of letters. So that makes it different. And since it's different, my fear would be if you read it and you didn't like it, you might assume that all of Jane Austen's novels are like that and not pick up another one. So I think Lady Susan is a bad place to start. That was the easy one. The other ones are more difficult. The second novel that I think is, you know, a bad place to start with Jane Austen is with Sense and Sensibility. I find it to be somewhat unsatisfying in several ways. It's essentially the story of the Dashwood family, a mother who has become a widow, her 3 daughters, Eleanor and Marianne, and I can't remember the last one's name. Anyway, the youngest one's name. She's been widowed. Her husband's died, and a son from a previous marriage has inherited her husband's estate, and they've kind of fallen on hard times. And it's basically the story of the fitful attempts at romance and getting married by Marianne Dashwood, who's romantic and foolish, who falls for the bad guy character and then ends up marrying, you know, a character who may be a little bit too, or who's definitely, I think, a little bit too old for her. And then the sensible sister, Eleanor Dashwood, who tries to guide the family through all these problems, and then ends up marrying, I think, the incredibly disappointing Mr. Ferrars. I can't remember his first name. Edmund Ferrars. Anyway, he just doesn't seem to be nearly good enough for Eleanor to me. And I don't think that of all Austen's novels, I think this one is not particularly successful in what it attempts to convey. There's some beautiful stuff in there. There's some great characters. There's some great kind of glimpses into the way in which society worked during Jane Austen's time, the time she wrote. But I just don't think it's all that successful. So I would also not recommend starting with Sense and Sensibility. And the third novel of Jane Austen's, I think, is a bad place to start, is Mansfield Park. Now, I read Mansfield Park, and I really liked it. I think it's a really good novel. But it is different in ways that are sometimes, I think, kind of hard to describe from Austen's other novels. Fanny Price is an incredibly virtuous character who comes from poverty, who ends up living with some relations of hers, the Bertram family, and then over the course of time, various, people attached to the Bertram family she has romantic feelings for, or they have romantic feelings for her. And it's just kind of a little bit of a different novel. It's also relatively long, another maybe good reason not to start with it. And to me, it just felt a little bit, its conclusion, much like I think was true with Sensibility, is a little bit unsatisfying. Who Fanny Price ends up with doesn't necessarily seem to me to be someone deserving of Fanny Price, but maybe that's just a thing. Anyway, so there are my 3 choices for where not to start with Jane Austen. Now, I know I've mentioned somebody's favorite Jane Austen novel in there, probably Mansfield Park, which I know is a favorite of some people here on BookTube. And again, I'm not saying that's a bad novel. I'm saying that for me, that's a bad place to start. And therefore, that kind of implies that I think there are better places to start with reading Jane Austen, and I certainly do. So I'm going to list 3 places I think might be a better place to start. So the number 1 place to start is, of course, Pride and Prejudice. It is a classic. It has that name for a good reason. It is an incredibly, almost perfect novel with great minor characters, great romance kind of tension between Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy, and Mrs. Bennet is a great character, and Mr. Collins is a great character, and it really gives you some insight into the difficulty of young women born into less than wealthy circumstances, and how dependent they are on marriage, and how dependent they are on marriage and having something of their own, and how dependent their sisters are on the older sisters getting married and finding a place and a position. It's really great. And then there's just a great love story. There's, the great scene, I'm sure everybody's aware, where Elizabeth rejects Mr. Darcy's first marriage proposal, and I won't go on from there because it's Pride and Prejudice, but it's great, and that's the place to start. If you are kind of like me and you have this kind of perverse sense of not starting with the most popular thing, you might think about starting somewhere else. I also would recommend Northanger Abbey as a place to start with Jane Austen. Northanger Abbey is not my favorite Jane Austen, not by a long stretch, but it does have some things going for it. I think it introduces you to a lot of the themes that exist in Jane Austen's work. There is a romance, there's a wrong man, there's a right man, but on top of that, it has this kind of mysterious, kind of almost like sinister, kind of gothic element to it, which makes it, kind of really fun to read. And I think you could read Northanger Abbey, particularly maybe if you were a younger person, I don't know. You could read Northanger Abbey, and that would be the vehicle that really got you into reading Jane Austen. I think it serves as a good kind of entry point for Austen. And the third place to start, I think, if you're looking to start with Jane Austen, you haven't read any of your works, or maybe if you're just looking for the second Jane Austen to pick up because the first one didn't convince you, the third one I would choose would be Emma. Now, Emma is a longer book than Northanger Abbey, and it's longer than Pride and Prejudice. And there's some elements in Emma that, I don't particularly like, but Emma is an incredibly nuanced character who grows and changes over the course of the novel. They're great kind of secondary characters. Mr. Woodhouse is a great character. There is a romance, which I find to be somewhat problematic because Knightley's approach to Emma, but it's a great book. It's a beautiful book. It really kind of characterizes people of the time period, their values. It kind of skewers them and satirizes them in a really gentle way. Mr. Elton, the local preacher, for lack of a better term, I can't remember what they call him, is a memorable character. And it's just a really, really good book, and I really enjoyed it. I think that would be another great place to start if you really want to kind of sink into the world of Austen and have a really a longer read. I think Emma would be the place to start. Anyway, there you go. I'm looking forward to seeing everybody's Jane Austen July TBRs. I'll have my TBR out on Saturday, which will include some Jane Austen related things, but not a whole lot. And, I'll look forward to your comments in the comment section below about my choices here, and thank you for watching.